Well, okay. So I'm a qualitative nerd. I'm glad that you are choosing a qualitative approach. I do think uh, the church culture and environment lends itself to qualitative inquiry, um, just because of the nature of what church and church life is about. Uh, it just tends to provide a better environment for qualitative data. Nursing is another field that lends itself to qualitative data. And if you think about it, what a nurse does and what a pastor does is not all that different. One ministers to the physical needs of the body, while another ministers to the needs of the spirit and the soul. And because there's that type of ministry that is happening, where you have a professional, whether it be a nurse or a pastor, who is um, giving their life to pour into another soul, uh, that measuring that experience and understanding those experiences tend to happen best through a qualitative environment. Now, I'll also say, I think the church needs to do a better job of figuring out how to do quantitative. I think there's some very important things that we need to be looking at quantitatively within the church. I think there are some, truthfully, I think science biases itself towards a quantitative approach and tends to wave off qualitative. And so I think as a field, we have to recognize that, okay, if all we produce is qualitative studies, then we will not be speaking the language of those that we're hoping to influence. And so I think we're going to have to become comfortable with doing quantitative within the church world. And obviously, there's a number of institutions and nonprofits that have done that well. They're kind of struggling a little bit now because of what their pastor has walked through. But the Willow Creek Association from Willow Creek Church for years has done some very, very tremendous work on the quantitative side, understanding spiritual formation, spiritual development, and they have offered some tremendous resources. And there's others as well that have operated within the quantitative field. And so I just really encourage you not to become intimidated or overwhelmed by quantitative, but to step back into it. Nevertheless, the point of this seminar is to deal with the qualitative piece. And so we'll cover a few of the pieces that we've dealt with up to this point, and then I'll kind of give a preview of some of the things that you are going to be hearing about in the next couple of videos. So in this session, really what my goal is to enable you to write the methodology section of your prospectus by asking and answering 5 questions. So let me go ahead and give you the 5 questions that you're going to need. Question 1 is this: what research questions guide my study? By the way, I'm recording this session, so I'll post it in Blackboard after we're done here, and you can go back and watch this. So don't fret if you miss something. So what research questions guide my study is question 1. Question 2 is, what qualitative design am I using? Maybe to align the vocabulary I've been using, you might ask, what qualitative tradition am I using? So last week, I talked about the 5 traditions. Cresswell talks about the 5 traditions. And so the answer to this question is, what qualitative tradition am I using? Question 3 is, where will I get my data from, or from where will I get my data? We'll talk about this question here in just a moment. How will I collect my data is the fourth question. And then how will I analyze the data? If you can answer these 5 questions in your methodology section, you've done a good job. You've provided an adequate methodology that tells the committee what you're going to do. These 5 questions are critical as well because of another step that you will need to walk through, which you don't need to worry about it right now, but I'm just going to introduce it to you. It's called the Institutional Review Board, IRB. We'll take you through some IRB training here in a couple of semesters, but IRB, the Institutional Review Board, deals with ensuring that you are not going to, that you will only, what's the right phrase for this? Your research subjects will experience minimal harm as they go through your study. Now, IRB is typically associated only, it used to be only typically associated with like medical experiments. And we'll deal with all of the background of it later, but the need for IRB came out of basically World War II with the work, the medical experiments that the Nazis performed on the Jews in the concentration camps. And it not only was it immoral and unethical, it killed many of them. But the medical community cannot ignore everything that came out of some of those studies. Some of those studies produced information that we didn't know about the human body at that point. Now, how it was accessed was absolutely terrible, and you can't do that. But it presented this issue to the medical community to ask, okay, well, sometimes we need to get at information to understand the human body, but how can we do that ethically and morally? And so there was a whole series of conversations that emerged from that over a number of decades, which eventually produced federal legislation that most medical studies have to follow. Now, you may be thinking, well, I'm doing a qualitative study. I'm not doing a medical study. So why would I care about IRB? Well, it also turns out you can cause harm in interview questions. So let me just give you an example. Suppose you are doing a study on, oh, I don't want to use that example because I used it elsewhere. Suppose you are doing a study on the alignment of associate pastors to senior pastors within a given church. And so you want to talk to all of the associate pastors and see how well they are aligned because you're exploring leadership theory. So you begin to ask questions of these associate pastors, and you talk to one associate pastor and come to find out this associate pastor is pretty frustrated with the senior pastor and is not in agreement with one of the decisions that has been made. Well, it's very possible that if that information came out in your study, or if somehow that information became known to the pastor, they could lose their job, which would then cause them harm. You could also ask questions that cause emotional distress, especially if you're dealing with a very sensitive subject, for example, abuse within the church. You could create some pretty significant harm. And so we as a university practice best practices by asking all of our doctor of ministry students who are doing studies and projects, which is all of you, to go through IRB and submit your methodology to the IRB so that we can ensure you will cause minimal harm and that you will protect the privacy and the data of the subjects that you work with. So these are the 5 questions. So let's deal with each one of them individually. The first one is going to be research questions. Now, very often what ends up happening is early researchers get confused by research question and interview question. And so they think the two are identical. But research questions are not interview questions. Research questions are the 2 to 3 questions that you want to answer if you can answer them, they will help you fulfill the study's purpose and answer the problem that the study is undertaking. And so the research questions are just typically 2 to 3 questions. It's not 10 questions, and it's usually more than 1 question. Let me see if I can give you a quick example. I need to pull up my notes here. I intended for this to be on the PowerPoint, but it didn't make it in as I am thinking about it. So there we go. All right, so let me give you the first example. Let's say the problem that you want to look at is this: pastors do not know how to lead in times of trouble. That's the problem you want to look at. And so the purpose of your study might be to do this: to understand the experiences pastors have in leading during a citywide protest. So again, the problem you're trying to solve: pastors don't know how to lead in times of troubled social times, like what we're dealing with right now. And so the way you're going to angle at this problem is through your purpose. And let's just say your purpose is to understand the experiences that pastors have in leading during a citywide protest, which means you want to find a pastor that had a citywide protest and maybe do a case study with that pastor to understand how they navigated during that season. So you would need to formulate 2 to 3 research questions that would guide the rest of your study. And so one of those research questions might be this: what expectations do pastors have of themselves during citywide protests? So this would be a very broad question that you want to answer in order to fulfill your purpose, which gets you at your problem. So these research questions tend to be very broad questions that you're not just going to outright ask to someone in an interview. Instead, you might have 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 interview questions that all deal with this idea of expectations that pastors have of themselves. And maybe you use those exact words, but if you're going to really get at an issue, you need to ask about the issue from multiple angles, not just one, frontal assault. You need to come at it from multiple angles, sometimes even from the backside, so that you can get a full sense of what that particular person is asking. So the research questions serve as these very broad, large questions that if I can get the answers to these questions, it's going to end up fulfilling my purpose, which will then help me solve the problem. Let me give you another example. Let's say the problem you want to explore is this: megachurches have large procedural gaps that allow people to hide without experiencing spiritual growth. So these big megachurches, people can just sneak in and sneak out. They can sit on the back row. They never really have to engage. And they don't seem to have the processes that collect those folks and help them advance forward. And that's a problem. And I want to look and see how I might solve that. And so my purpose might be to understand the experiences of, quote, uninvolved church attenders at a megachurch who are not members and yet have attended for more than 5 years. So I want to talk to people that they're not members of that church, yet they've been attending for more than 5 years, and I'm going to call them uninvolved church attenders. And so I want to understand their experiences. So that's the purpose of my study, to understand their experiences. So one of my research questions might be this: what are the previous church experiences of these uninvolved church attenders that have caused them to hide at the megachurch? So I've created a research question that maybe the literature has informed me. Previous experience tends to influence current experience at a church. So I want to try to understand what the previous experience of these parishioners are at their churches. And so when I interview them, I'm going to ask 10, 11, 12 questions that kind of get at this idea of previous experience and try to gather a sense of what is happening. So again, research questions are these 2 to 3 broad, high-level questions. They're not your interview questions. They're not the questions that you're going to write that you're going to ask in the interview. They're these big, broad-based questions. And what the research questions do is that they tether, I like the word tether more than leash, but I have leash down here. They tether your study. So I'm sure you've been driving along when somebody was walking their dog, and they've got these leashes that they're expandable leashes, and they kind of roll up within themselves, so you can keep the dog close, but you can also kind of let it loose, and the dog can go 10 feet out. And many times when I'm watching that, it looks to me more like the dog is walking the person rather than the person walking the dog, because the person is holding this leash and the dog is pulling them, and the dog is not trained to know how to walk on leash. And so that person ends up fighting with this leash to keep this dog from walking off. So what the research questions do is they keep you from having to do that. And they help you train this study to stay right close to you. So when we got our dog Rooney, about, I guess it's close to 15 years ago, he passed away just a few months ago. And so I was reflecting on this earlier, but when we first got him, we took him to dog training, and they taught us how to walk him on leash. And basically they taught us that he stays with his nose just barely ahead of our knee. And so he's not jumping out ahead and he's not falling back. He's walking right next to us. And then when we stop, he stops and he sits down and waits for us to move. And we use the leash. We can tug on the leash to direct him to move forward. That's what your research questions do. They bring your study under control so that it doesn't run all over the place, so that you're not having to, grab it and drag it forward, nor are you having to pull it back and hold on to it. These research questions are critically important in helping you guide and manage your study. And so you'll need to come up with 2 to 3 research questions for your study. They're not interview questions. They offer you a way to tether your study and keep it under control. And if you answer the questions, you will fulfill the study's purpose and problem. And in fact, in chapter 5 of your project, those research questions will once again reveal themselves, and you will actually give the answer to those research questions in chapter 5 of your study, which is why they're so critically important. It's also why you don't want to have 10 of them, because that would make your chapter 5 way too long. You also don't want only one, because then you don't really have much substance to your study. So let me just pause right there before I go to the next question that you need to answer and see if there are any questions or comments.
I do have a question actually from the reading, and you touched on it.
Yeah.
It's not on the research question though. Actually, I'm back to the participant identity,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that's something that we can cover at a later time. I'm
Okay.
curious, is it always anonymous? I've read dissertations in our review project where there was disclosure of the participants and their names and their places, and then others, the composite identities or stories will be used. Uh,
Yeah. So think about documentaries that are produced. Um, very often, a documentary, a well-done documentary, and most of the time, documentaries utilize a qualitative study framework. Most of the time, it's like a case study, but it could also be phenomenology, where they are looking at an issue, and they've talked with 6 people that have dealt with this issue. So most of the time on those documentaries, they want to tell the story of this individual. What is required is that that individual gives full and complete permission to tell the story with their name attached. And it's up to the researcher to make that decision. Is this story going to be best portrayed, telling this story, if I can connect it to an actual person, uh, and actually introduce people to this person and help them know this person. Uh, Very often, what happens with these empirical kind of studies like this, which there's not really an intention to produce a documentary out of it. Most often, what happens is you omit the personal data of that individual. So you change their name, you change their job status, their living location. In I did a qualitative study for my dissertation, and in some cases, I changed the gender of the person when it was not important for who I was talking with. I changed their gender so that they felt free to say what I needed them to share with me without fear of reprisal from their peers or from their bosses. So it is there's not one answer to that question, Michael, because we have to look at what you're doing and the kind of data that you're collecting, and where you're heading, and then ask the question: are we most likely to get accurate and honest data if we conceal this person's identity, or if we reveal it? And sometimes you don't know until you start collecting the data. And if something like that emerges, then we might have to make a change mid-course.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Any other questions about the research questions? Okay. So let's talk about the qualitative design. If you've watched the videos, you know that there are, of the 5 traditions, there are 3 that I want you to choose from. I don't want you to choose ethnography because it takes too long to do that. And I don't want you to choose biography because my personal opinion is that I don't believe those are appropriate for doctoral dissertations and doctor of ministry work. And so that leaves you with case study, phenomenology, and grounded theory. Is there anyone? I don't want to expose anyone, and so I won't ask that question.
Sorry, I didn't
Sorry, that's Siri trying to talk to me. I'm not talking to you, Siri. So remember that case study wants to explain the issue. Phenomenology wants to describe the issue. Grounded theory wants to develop a theory that would provide a deeper understanding of why something is happening. So case study can lean very closely into grounded theory. In fact, in my dissertation, I used a case study methodology, but I ended up producing a theory in that case study. And so there was a bit of a combo there between case study and grounded theory. And sometimes it works out that way. Case study is going to be the simplest and easiest for most of you. Others that I've talked to, phenomenology is going to be the better approach. You can do grounded theory, but most of the time my experience has been that Doctor of Ministry students have not had enough exposure to grounded theory to be really comfortable with it. So in your methodology, you will need to choose one of these three, and then you'll need to do one other thing, not just tell me I'm going to do case study, but you'll need to explain why case study is the best methodology here, or why phenomenology is the best methodology or the best tradition, or why grounded theory is the best tradition. That's all going to depend on the problem you're trying to solve and the purpose that you're going after. It would also lean a little bit into where you're going to collect data and the kinds of data that you're going to collect. So in doctoral work, not only do you need to tell us what you're going to do, you need to tell us why you have chosen that approach. Okay, so once you choose, so for this assignment, you're just going to make something up. Now, if you want to actually work on your actual project and kind of field test it and see how it works, that's fine. But you do not need to do that. So you can just make something up. I want to look at something over here, and so I'm going to choose case study. But you would still need to explain to me why case study for this pretend study that you're going to do is appropriate for both the problem and the purpose that you're after. Okay, so what is my qualitative design, or what is my qualitative tradition? You're going to tell us which of the traditions you're going to choose, and then why that is the most appropriate tradition to get at the information you want to get at. The next question you need to answer is, where am I going to get data from? So this deals with the location of your study. Where are you drawing information from? Now, sometimes it can't be narrowed down to an actual location, because you're doing phenomenology, so it spreads across multiple locations. Well, you need to tell us that, and then you need to tell us why are you choosing these individuals to examine as part of your phenomenology. So if let's go back to that megachurch example that I was talking about earlier. Let's say I wanted to talk to people that I'm trying to remember off the top of my head now, but people that had been at the church for 5 years, but had not been, they had not become a member. Okay, I need to explain why those parameters and not other parameters. What is it about those parameters that are likely to get me more information? So this is not like quantitative, where you have to spell out these very specific criteria for who's part of a sample and who is not part of a sample in order to get a random sample. Very often in in qualitative study, you do what's called a convenience sample. And that means these people are near me. I have access to them. I know they have information that will contribute to my study. And so I'm going to induct them into my study. Well, you need to tell us that you know what a convenience sample is and that you understand what the limitations are to a convenience sample and what the implications are if you choose a convenience sample and being able to translate your study into other arenas and into other locations. So the data location gives us a sense that you know why you are selecting, who you are selecting to look at, and provides a rationale for the choices that you're making to move forward. Okay? The next question is going to be about data collection. Now, we haven't dealt with this yet, and the next video will deal with this. And so I'm going to ask you to collect 3 kinds of data. We choose 3 kinds of data collection and qualitative inquiry in order to satisfy what is called triangulation. And you've heard me in the other videos utilize that word in relation to the reliability, the verifiability of a study. Triangulation means I'm pulling data from 3 different locations, and hopefully I will find crossover of information. That's the goal of triangulation, is that I hear something from an interview, but I also observe it through an observation, and I can identify it through some artifacts that I collect. And so then my data is triangulated, and I can be fairly certain that this is an accurate assessment of what I have been collecting and not just something I read into the data collection. So in the next video, I'll talk more about interviews, observations, and artifact analysis. Another term for artifact analysis is document analysis. So artifact analysis tends to be those things that they are non-living elements that can only speak to you because of their shape or because of their existence. So as an example, these AirPod holders right here, if I was doing a study on, I don't know, I'm doing some sort of study, and I choose this to look at as an artifact. I might choose to look at its shape, its square shape, its rounded edges. I might look what the owner of it had written on the front. So in my case, it says Doc. That's my granddad name. That's what my grandbaby calls me. She calls me Doc. And so as a researcher, that kind of information would be important to me to know, hey, tell me about why Doc is on that. What does that mean to you? The fact that it exists there, the fact that it is typed out, that it's placed on with sticky, all of these details that don't have a voice to speak to you, but they exist. Artifact analysis can be logos, they can be colors, they can be actual documents, books that are on the library shelf of a interviewee subject, books that are on a nightstand. So when you go into an interview setting, and you always want to go to the location of the person that you're interviewing, because when you go in, you look around the room. What is visible? What do I see? These are all artifacts and are part of your data collection. So you are the assessment tool. You are doing the assessing. You are collecting the data. And so it's up to you to have a keen eye and to pay attention. And so we'll talk more about that in the next video. And then you will answer the question, how am I going to analyze my data? And you'll do that through one method. Now I'm going to tell you there's about 200 methods for qualitative data analysis. And since my job is not to train you to be a PhD that knows how to do qualitative inquiry at every level, I'm not going to require you to know all 200 of those. And so I'm going to give you one, and we're going to go into a bit of depth on the fourth video with the constant comparative method. And I'm going to teach you how to analyze data with the constant comparative method. So in the methodology, you will tell me I'm going to utilize the constant comparative method, and then you will briefly describe what the constant comparative method is and how you intend to utilize it specifically for your study. Okay, so those are the 5 questions that you need to answer. Again, they are this: what research questions guide my study? What qualitative design am I using? Where will I get my data from? How will I collect data? And how will I analyze the data? You answer those 5 questions and you have an outstanding methodology section. Again, 3 pages, double spaced. That's all you're going to need for this assignment. All right, who has questions?